that which is hidden is often more powerful than that which is seen. Some knowledge is too dangerous to be forgotten, but too powerful to be shared openly. In the last episode, we decoded the language of the sky, the sun, the moon, the cross, the cosmic wheel, and we saw how ancient symbols were not just decorations, they were instructions, a way of preserving memory through image, rituals, architecture, and sacred form. But now we come to one of the oldest, most powerful, and most misunderstood symbols in human history, the serpent. It appears everywhere, in Egypt, in India, in Greece, in Mesoamerica, in China, in Gnostic texts, and in the Bible. In some traditions, the serpent is wisdom. In others, deception. In some, healing. In others, poison. In one story, it awakens humanity. In another, it corrupts paradise. So which is it? Was the serpent evil? Or was it something older than good and evil? A symbol of energy, transformation, knowledge, power. To answer that, we have to separate two things: what is measurable and what is meaningful. Science tells us what happens. Symbols tell us how human beings made sense of it. Sometimes those two overlap, sometimes they don't. But both matter, because the ancients did not divide reality the way we do. They did not separate astronomy from religion, the body from the soul, matter from spirit, nature from consciousness. To them, the world was alive with patterns. And the serpent was one of the oldest ways of describing that pattern. Welcome back to the third narrative. The serpent is one of the most enduring symbols on Earth. It appears in ancient traditions not simply as an animal, but as a force. It coils, it sheds its own skin, it moves between Earth and underworld. That is why the serpent became such a powerful symbol. It represented the hidden current beneath visible life, the force that moves through nature, the wisdom that can heal or destroy depending on who holds it. In episode 5, we followed the ancient skywatchers into the heavens. We saw how the sun, moon, cross, and swastika encoded cosmic order. But when those same skywatchers looked upward, they would have seen something else: the Milky Way, a luminous band stretching across the night sky, a river of stars, a winding path, a celestial serpent. To modern eyes, the Milky Way is a galaxy, stars, gas, dust, and structure. But to the ancient eyes, it was alive. It curved across the heavens like a sacred river. It moved with the seasons. It marked time. It divided the sky. And in its shape, the ancients may have seen the same thing they saw in the serpent: a flowing power, a cosmic current, a path between worlds. The serpent was not only on the ground, it was in the sky. And once you begin to see it that way, the symbols begin to open. The serpent is motion, energy, cycles, renewal, the visible sign of an invisible force. But the ancients were not only watching the sky, they were watching the earth. Across ancient sites, we find spirals, coils, winding lines, and serpent forms carved into stone. Some may have marked water, some may have marked paths, some may even have marked the turning seasons or the flow of unseen force. The second narrative usually calls these decorations, but the third narrative asks a deeper question. What if spirals and serpents were attempts to show movement that cannot be seen directly. The flow of water, the movement of the stars, the current of life, the forces that pass through the earth and through the human body. While the ancients didn't have modern physics, they had observation, they had pattern recognition, they watched the heavens, they watched animals, they watched seasons, and they encoded what they saw into symbols. The serpent became the image of a force that moves beneath the surface, a force that rises when awakened, a force that can regenerate or corrupt. Before we go deeper into the serpent, we need to pause on the word energy, because this is where people usually split into two camps. One side hears energy and thinks only in scientific terms: electricity, magnetism, measurable fields, chemical reactions. The other side hears energy and thinks of prana, chi, aura, vibration, spirit, or life force. Now, we don't need to collapse those into one thing, but we do need to ask whether they are pointing toward the same intuition: that life is not inert, that the body is not just flesh, that consciousness is not just a machine, and that what we call empty space may not be empty in the simple way we were taught to imagine it. Ancient traditions spoke of an unseen medium. Some call it the ether. Others call it prana, chi, spirit. The names changed, but the intuition remained. Everything is connected by something unseen, a hidden force, current, or order beneath the surface of things. Now, modern science does not confirm the ancient ether exactly as mystics described it. But even modern physics does not treat reality as dead emptiness. Fields exist. Forces exist. Signals pass through the body. The heart and brain produce measurable electrical and magnetic activity. Cells communicate chemically, electrically, and through patterns that are still being studied. So when ancient people spoke of a life force, maybe they were not doing science in the modern sense, but they may have been describing a real experience. That human beings carry presence, that emotions change the body, that fear feels different from peace, that love feels different from hatred, that some people leave you stronger while others leave you drained. We all know this. Some traditions call it aura, some call it spirit, some call it energy. But whatever language we use, the experience is real enough that every serious tradition tried to explain it. And that brings us to the deeper point. If human beings are not only physical, but energetic and spiritual, then morality is not merely a rulebook. It might be alignment. We usually think of morality as rules, laws, commandments, social expectations. Do this, don't do that. But what if morality is also energetic? What if right and wrong are not only about obedience or punishment, but about harmony and distortion? Think about it. When a person lies constantly, their mind becomes cloudy. When a person lives in fear, their body becomes tense. When a person is consumed by envy, lust, cruelty, or addiction, their spirit becomes heavy. But when a person lives with courage, discipline, honesty, compassion, and restraint, something else happens. They become clear, stronger, more centered, less reactive, less easy to control. This is where morality and energy meet. Not in the childish sense of being good for approval, but in the deeper sense of maintaining the integrity of your life force. A person ruled by fear is easier to manipulate. A person ruled by lust is easier to tempt. A person ruled by pride is easier to flatter. A person ruled by rage is easier to steer. But a person who has mastered himself becomes difficult to enslave. This is why every serious spiritual tradition teaches discipline. Not because life is meant to be joyless, but because ungoverned energy becomes weakness. The ancient teachers understood this. They did not teach morality only as guilt. They taught it as formation, a way of preserving the human being, a way of strengthening the inner field, a way of preparing the soul to carry power without being destroyed by it. That is why figures like Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha were remembered not only as builders, but as moral teachers. They gave rules for how people should live. They spoke with kindness. They taught harmony. That was not separate from sacred knowledge. It was the condition for receiving it. Because knowledge without character becomes dangerous, and power without alignment becomes domination. This brings us back to Atlantis. If Atlantis preserved an older science of energy, symbols, geometry, vibration, and consciousness, then its greatest achievement may also have been its greatest danger. Because every civilization that touches power eventually faces the same choice. Will knowledge be used to heal or to control? Will it raise the human being or enslave him? Will it discipline the lower self or feed it? That is where sacred knowledge becomes dangerous. Not because the knowledge itself is evil, but because power always magnifies the one who holds it. In the hands of the wise, it becomes healing, order, clarity, and awakening. But in the hands of the corrupt, it becomes manipulation, domination, possession, and control. That is how sacred knowledge becomes inverted. The same knowledge that can awaken can also be used to enslave. The same symbols that can elevate can also be used to manipulate. The same understanding of the human soul can become a weapon against it. That is why this episode matters. The war is not only over information, it is over energy, attention, emotions, desire, fear, vibrations, the inner condition of the human being. Because if you keep people trapped in fear, lust, ego, anger, addiction, and distraction, you do not need to conquer them openly. They will carry the prison inside themselves. And that is the secret every mystery school understood. Before a person can be trusted with power, he must first be formed, purified, disciplined, and aligned. Otherwise, the serpent does not rise. It turns inward. It becomes appetite. It becomes domination. It becomes the dragon that devours. Now that we have laid the foundation, we can return to the serpent. Because the serpent was not simply good or evil. It was energy, a hidden force, a life-giving current moving through the human being, a sacred power waiting to be awakened. In the East, this force is called Kundalini, a Sanskrit word often translated as the coiled one. It is described as a serpent resting at the base of the spine. And when that energy is awakened through discipline, breath, meditation, devotion, or inner work, it begins to rise. Not through the jungle, but through the body, through the spine, through consciousness. This is not just a snake story. It is a symbolic map of transformation. A map of how a person moves from instinct to awareness, from the lower self to the higher self. And this path is marked by the chakras, 7 energy centers within us, a pattern we have already seen before in episode 1 with the 7 days of creation. The same structure returns, 7 stages of ascent. Because the ancients were not only describing the cosmos, they were describing us. In the chakra system, the serpent rises through the 7 centers of the body. Each center carries a power, And every power can be expressed in two ways: balanced or distorted. When the energy flows cleanly, the center expresses its higher nature. When the energy is blocked, wounded, overstimulated, or corrupted, the same center expresses its shadow. At the base is the root. This is survival, security, grounding, and safety. When the root is balanced, a person feels stable, present, able to stand in the world without being ruled by fear. But when it is distorted, survival becomes anxiety. The world feels unsafe. Fear takes over. Above that is the sacral. This is desire, pleasure, emotion, sexuality, and creativity. When the sacral is balanced, desire becomes creation. Emotion becomes movement. Life becomes vibrant. But when it is distorted, desire becomes addiction. Pleasure becomes obsession. The creative force turns into compulsion. Then comes the solar plexus. This is will, confidence, identity, and personal power. When it is balanced, a person has discipline, courage, the strength to choose, the strength to say no. But when it is distorted, will becomes ego, confidence becomes pride, power becomes domination. Then comes the heart, the bridge between the lower and higher centers. When the heart is open, love becomes strength, compassion becomes connection. A person can forgive without becoming blind, and connect without being controlled. But when it is blocked, love becomes fear, protection becomes numbness. The person closes down and mistakes isolation for strength. Above the heart is the throat. This is truth, speech, and expression. When the throat is clear, the inner world and the outer word begin to match. A person speaks honestly, not manipulatively, but truthfully. But when it is distorted, truth becomes performance. A person hides, lies, or says what must be said to protect their image rather than reveal the truth. Then comes the third eye. This is vision, intuition, and pattern recognition. When it is clear, a person sees beneath the surface. He becomes harder to deceive because he can sense when something does not align. But when it is distorted, vision becomes delusion, intuition becomes paranoia, pattern recognition becomes fantasy, and finally, the crown, the opening to the infinite, to unity, to source, to God. When the crown is clear, a person remembers that he is a part of something larger than himself. But when it is distorted, he becomes spiritually disconnected or lost in false enlightenment, using spirituality as another mask for the ego. That is the key. The goal is not to escape the body. The goal is to bring the whole being into alignment, to clear the distortions, to discipline the energy, to allow the serpent to rise without being twisted by fear, desire, ego, wounds, lies, illusions, or separation. This is the journey of the serpent. Not the abandonment of the body, but the alignment of body, soul, and spirit. And that is why this symbol appears again and again. Because the ancients were not only talking about snakes, they were talking about awakening. They were talking about energy. They were talking about power. And one of the clearest images of that power is the staff with the serpent rising around it. You've seen the image before on medical logos, ambulances, hospitals. It's a staff with two serpents and sometimes wings at the top. Today, many people call this the Caduceus and associate it with medicine. However, historically, the older medical symbol is the rod of Asclepius, a single serpent wrapped around a staff. The Caduceus itself belongs to Hermes, the messenger of the gods. But even that distinction matters, because Hermes was not merely a messenger. He was a guide between worlds, a figure who moved between heaven, earth, and the underworld. So whether we are looking at the single serpent of Asclepius or the twin serpents of Hermes, the deeper image remains: a serpent rising around an axis. The staff represents the center line, the spine, the path between lower and higher worlds. The serpent represents the living current moving around that axis, and the wings represent ascent, the rising of consciousness, the unlocking of higher knowledge. The Caduceus is not just decoration, it is a spiritual diagram, a picture of how power rises through the human being, duality balanced around the center, matter and spirit, sun and moon, lower and higher, the serpent path made visible. Once you understand this, the ancient world begins to look different. In Egypt, the serpent appears as the Uraeus, the cobra rising from the pharaoh's crown. It symbolized divine authority, protection, and awakened power. The ruler was not merely political. He was presented as one who carried sacred force. In Mesoamerica, the serpent appears as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a serpent with wings, a figure of wisdom, teaching, and civilization. In India, the serpent is Kundalini, the coiled energy that rises through the body toward liberation. In Greece, the serpent appears with Hermes and Asclepius, connected to healing, crossing boundaries, and guiding souls between worlds. In Gnostic traditions, the Ophites honored the serpent, not as the enemy, but as the bringer of knowledge, the one who opened the eyes. In China, the serpent becomes the dragon, not merely a monster, but a symbol of wisdom, strength, celestial power, and command over the forces of nature. And in Genesis, the serpent gives humanity the knowledge of good and evil. He does not kill Adam and Eve. He changes them. He opens their eyes. That is why the serpent is so dangerous as a symbol. It sits at the threshold, between obedience and rebellion, between ignorance and knowledge, between instinct and awakening. The serpent is the guardian of the forbidden door. And that is why later systems worked so hard to flatten it into one meaning: evil. But the ancient world remembered something more complicated. The serpent was not evil by default. It was not holy by default. It was powerful, and power is neutral. Fire can warm a home or burn a city. Knowledge can liberate or enslave. Energy can heal or dominate. That is the key. The serpent represents force, but force must be governed by consciousness. That is why ancient traditions were so concerned with preparation, discipline, moral order, and self-mastery. Because awakening without restraint is dangerous. Power without alignment becomes corruption. And this brings us back to the question that started the episode. If the ancients possessed this knowledge, where did it go? It did not disappear. It was hidden, preserved in symbols, guarded in mystery schools, twisted by rulers, demonized by later religions, and weaponized by those who understood that the easiest way to control a people is not to destroy their bodies, it is to control their energy, keep them afraid in the root, overstimulated in the sacral, ego-driven in the solar plexus, wounded in the heart, silent or dishonest in the throat, confused in the third eye, and disconnected from God at the crown. Then the serpent never rises cleanly. the human being remains fragmented, reactive, and easy to manipulate. But the opposite is also true. A person who clears, disciplines, and aligns his energy becomes harder to control. A civilization that raises its moral frequency becomes harder to corrupt. And a people who understand the serpent no longer fear the symbol. They understand the choice: rise or descend, awaken or be consumed. That is the crossroads. And it is the same crossroads Atlantis faced. The serpent's path continues, but it does not always lead to the light. In the next episode, we follow the darker half of this knowledge. How sacred energy becomes manipulation, how power outran knowledge, and how Atlantis, once remembered as a crown of the ancient world, collapsed from within. I'll see you in the next episode.